Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Horizon Managed Services podcast. This is episode 8. I'm joined with Rob Stoner, owner of Horizon and Managed Services. In this one, we're going to be talking about Microsoft Office 365 versus Google G Suite, essentially some of the differences between the two, as well as, typically what organizations should go with depending on what their business needs are. But just on a high level, Rob, can you talk to me a little bit just about Microsoft Office 365, its platform, and then G Suite's platform, just the overview of what they're both capable of and maybe some of the similarities between the two?
Sure. Yeah. Frankly, Microsoft 365 was formerly known as Office 365 for many years. And Google Workspace or G Suite or Google Apps or whatever Google name they change it to tomorrow. Functionally, at a foundational level, they're both about collaboration and enabling work. The differences really come in play with how they go about doing that and kind of the philosophy of how you collaborate and whether you're doing your work in a browser versus leveraging kind of the tried and true traditional Office applications installed on a computer or a remote environment. And just about the type of controls and security that's needed depending on the org. There are some differences, but they're more nuanced than just super high level. But they're primarily driven around the operational maturity of an organization, and that's and what we typically find is the orgs that are they're just starting out. You're maybe a one-man shop or just a couple employees, and everyone's wearing a bunch of different hats. You don't have kind of individual defined roles where you need to kind of silo some information. And everyone's kind of used to the free Gmail account experience and using email and Google Docs and all that. Google Workspace or G Suite, it's a great place to start. It's very straightforward and simple from just your average Joe perspective. You can kind of click through it and get the basic security things in place that kind of will protect you from, they'll be a good starting point anyways. Microsoft 365, it's a great platform. It's what we use. It's what we standardize on it with our clients. It's a bit more involved, but with that involvement comes a lot more flexibility and adaptability to more established business processes and different structures to work, I'll say.
Sure. So from that standpoint, it sounds like at least from high level, pretty much they can, there's a lot of similarities, but there are some differences just from a customizable standpoint. Can you talk to me a little bit more about some of the more customizable standpoints that Microsoft might offer versus G Suite for a business? If you have any particular examples or certain applications.
Sure. The perfect example is Office 365. You can use email in the cloud, outlook.office.com, just like you'd use like Gmail or the Google Workspace version of email. It's all cloud-based, all just in your web browser. But you can also use Outlook, which is traditionally more Outlook installed on your desktop or on your mobile app, mobile phone. That's one difference where like Microsoft 365 is more flexible in that you have the tried and true. Everyone knows how to use Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook and Access. You've got Microsoft bundles that all in. Some of the flexibility also comes from, and again, it gets very nuanced because they both do very similar things in slightly different ways. But you when trying to tie in third-party applications, so like you're trying to have one login for a computer, for their email, for their document storage, for a cloud application that you're subscribing to and your entire team is using or a subset of your team is using. Microsoft has arguably a larger ecosystem and a more broad support for tying that all together. Now, that's not to say you can't do it with Google Workspace or G Suite. There are ways of kind of stringing together different components and third-party tools to get the same kind of experience, but it isn't fluid. It's not just a single pane of glass to get it all deployed and secured and managed. It's you kind of tying systems together and hoping that nothing in the chain breaks.
Gotcha. Okay. No, that makes sense from that standpoint. I know another thing that you mentioned too, just in the beginning was, typically G Suite can be very, very easy to use and very, very flexible for maybe a very small business owner, like a one person or maybe two-person company. But typically, what I've seen just in organizations that I've worked with, and then even from an MSP standpoint, pretty much MSP that is, that I've come across typically uses Microsoft Office, 365. So, for example, if I'm, in a growing company, say, for example, I'm in the manufacturing space, I'm a growing company. What are some of the advantages of, adapting to a Microsoft platform versus, being on G Suite or evaluating those two options? I
I
know one
mean,
of them. Mhm.
no, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I know you mentioned one of them would be, the flexibility and things like that, but can you dive into a little bit more of, first of all, why most MSPs use Microsoft Office versus G Suite? And then second of all, what types of benefits would growing companies get from making that transition?
Sure. I mean, first, a lot of MSPs, I'd say a majority of them, anyways, standardize on Microsoft 365. And to be clear, it's not from like a margin or an incentivization standpoint. We're not making bank off of Microsoft. It's actually the opposite. We arguably make more from a margin standpoint going with a Google Workspace. But for us, and why we standardize on it, is it provides a single identity management, meaning like the user, Mitchell Skarsky, you're identified as Mitchell Skarsky in Office 365, and that is our central source of truth for your user object. So then when you need to sign into any third-party system we're using, everything ties back to your identity. You don't have to remember a bunch of different passwords. And from a security standpoint, it's more granular controls. Think of it like it's if you want it to be simple, you lose the ability to control for specific scenarios and circumstances. And so if we've got a client that has certain controls or regulations or compliance requirements they need to meet, we can tune that Microsoft 365 specifically to their environment, to their requirements. And to a lesser extent, you can do that with Google Workspace. And again, a lot of what we're saying today, or what I'm saying today, it can be done in different ways in different platforms. In our experience, and most MSPs we find prefer that we can do it all within one platform rather than having to bring in 2 or 3 different technologies to accomplish the same goal. Does that make sense?
No, that makes sense. And another thing that I was reading too from an article, and I'll link it below in the video description, was one of the things with G Suite is, integrating with third-party platforms. So things like Salesforce, things like CRM systems, things like ERP systems. What I've read overall in the common trend that I've seen is typically integration with, some of those other platforms, like you mentioned, can be done, but it seems a little bit harder on G Suite versus Microsoft 365 when it comes to either like formatting or things like that. Have you ever ran into or heard of
Oh,
any stories similar to that?
absolutely. And without getting into specifics, because there's like NDAs and stuff like that, I can't talk specifically about. But I'll use a broad strokes analogy. When these third-party platforms are building out their integrations, right? So Salesforce or your ERP system of choice, they look at what the market is saying, and the market says most of their clients are using Microsoft 365. So majority of them are. Let's say you've got 75% using Microsoft 365, 25% using Google Workspace or G Suite. Well, they're going to get more return for their investment in building out the integration with Microsoft 365 and being able to serve more of their client base with an improved experience by prioritizing the integration with Microsoft 365. So that's not to say they don't eventually build an integration or you can't do it, but usually it's a lesser experience or more convoluted experience than like Microsoft tends to just be a de facto standard implementation of like SAML or OAuth 2 type of an integration. And that's what we see as a general trend. We've got internally, anecdotally speaking, we use some tools where they only have an integration with Microsoft and they have no integration with G Suite or Google Workspace. Again, for those same reasons, is yeah, they have clients that also use G Suite, but it's not enough to warrant the investment of building out this whole additional other development and integration in their platform when it would just be a small subset of their client base that would benefit from it.
Gotcha. No, and that makes a lot of sense. Essentially, Microsoft, I guess from your perspective, in terms of organizations overall in the United States, maybe you might not have an exact number, but what would you say that ratio would be in terms of who is using G Suite versus who is using Office 365? You think it's like a 70-30 type of split or 60-40 or 50-50?
I
What
mean,
do
I'd
you
say if you let's restrict it or constrain it a little bit to what I'm going to term mature businesses. So not your startups, not your just couple employee firms, but they're like 10, 15, 20 plus employees. They've got some defined roles. Yes, their employees may be wearing a couple hats in certain scenarios, but by and large, it's a structured business that's operating, and it's more like a machine rather than like everyone trying to do everything to get momentum, right? And I'd say it's easily 70-30, if not greater, usage and adoption of Microsoft 365 in that mature business space. And may even be closer to 80-20. I mean, there are mature businesses out there that do just fine in like Google Workspace environments. If you're very light from the more traditional knowledge worker perspective of employee, and you're very heavy on more of the creative or the collaborative type. So like you're in more graphic design type of a business or some kind of a creative field where you don't need like SharePoint and these massive document libraries, but you're dealing with files that are artwork or creative, and it's a much more collaborative workflow. That's where, at least historically speaking, Google Workspace has really shined. It's kind of like why Mac was the de facto platform for artists and filmmakers and graphic designers and all that. It was designed for that type of collaboration or their workflow initially. And Google Workspace, previously G Suite or Google Apps or whatever you want to call it, it was designed from the ground up as a collaborative editing platform in the web browser. It started like their collaborative editing started way back, I want to say in like 2008 or 9 as Google Wave, and then it was going back a long time. But needless to say, the design, the focus was on collaborative, not on more of the traditional, we need to get scopes of work, here's contracts. You were doing deliverables and structured documentation on like a manufacturing process. Like your typical manufacturer, yes, they're going to collaborate on some documents and all that, but that's typically during the sales process, not necessarily like editing the creative content that's going to go on a website and you're having like 3 or 4 editors trying to massage content in the same document. But what you're going to have in that manufacturing space or that client is they need to have their SOWs, their shop order documents. It's all structured documentation that gets generated. They fill out information. They're doing reporting. They're doing data retention and kind of. They've got compliance reasons that they need to keep records of what was done in the process of making this part and making things to spec. And it's driven by what would historically be a paper process. It's now a digital, and you can kind of implement that whole thing in Microsoft 365 at a much more advanced level than you can in Google Workspace because they were designed for different models of work.
Gotcha. Now, from my standpoint, the question that kind of pops up into my mind, since names have changed and technology has obviously progressed since 2008, has Microsoft made any specific changes to cater to that more collaborative work environment that G Suite has historically been known for?
Absolutely. You can, I mean, there's again outliers here and there, edge cases of features that Google G Suite or Google Workspace may have that Microsoft hasn't fully implemented in 365 yet. But by and large, the collaborative editing, like you and me hopping into a Word document and making changes live, or we've got a spreadsheet open and we've got 5 people on a video call or in a meeting, and we're all in there looking at data, and we may need to make some changes or add information to this spreadsheet. That it's baked in and it's enabled from day one in Microsoft 365, same as it is in Google Workspace. Google Workspace was just first to market, arguably, with that more collaborative approach. And Microsoft saw the value, and clients wanting that or asking for that. And so they developed their own version of that collaboration.
Gotcha. So it's essentially caught up originally
Yep.
from
Yeah.
G Suite's original idea, and that makes sense from that standpoint
And,
too.
and beyond that, one of the major value adds that Microsoft has brought to the 365 platform in the last couple of years is just like Google Workspace, Microsoft 365 is a per user per month fee, and all that. Like it's SaaS software. You pay 15, 20, 30 bucks, depending on your license, whatever the case may be, per user per month, and then you have access to it. Google Workspace has more or less stayed stagnant as far as what applications are included. They've added some features. They've changed some app names. I think it was like Hangouts and Meet, and I lose track of what their new chat or like video chat platform is in Google Workspace. But Microsoft's rolled out Teams. They've now got Microsoft Flow for building automations for within the 365 platform. You've got Power BI for business intelligence, being able to tie data in from various cloud applications, various local apps, spreadsheets, access databases, all that kind of stuff, and build quite rapidly some like management level or operations type dashboards to provide at a glance information to different departments or different people, so you can see the health of your org, or basically any kind of information you want to see at a glance. You can build it, throw it on a dashboard or a TV in your office or what have you, and see it. They've got like we're all used to in this post-COVID world, like no one kind of trades emails back and forth to try and find a time to meet. We're used to Calendly links or similar. Microsoft has bookings now, so it's all included. And the list goes on as far as the tools and apps and features that they keep adding to their platform. That is included for that per user per month fee. And historically speaking, they haven't raised rates very often. I think they recently raised rates within the last year, and previously it hadn't been raised for years.
Sure. And just by the information that I was looking at online, pretty much the pricing difference per user it's very, very similar, almost the same. One thing I did notice with Microsoft is that one key difference is the amount of storage that you get. I believe it's 1 terabyte of storage initially to start off. I forget which package it was called.
Yeah, I think that starts coming with business standard. Don't quote me on that. We primarily focus on business premium and above because of some of the security features and benefits that come with it. But yeah, with business premium, you get 1 terabyte of storage per user for cloud storage. Then that's across their OneDrive and pooled also available for SharePoint for like your traditional file servers and all that. You can move all those files up into SharePoint, access them from your computer, same as you would from a file server, but also have access to them through a web browser from your mobile device, like iPad, iPhone, Android phone, what have you, all right through an app, so you can work from anywhere. And arguably, Google has the same thing with Google Drive, but the granularity and the structure that you can put in place to support different approaches and operations and different needs from a business standpoint, it just really isn't there in our experience with Google Workspace. And I'm sure we're going to hear from others in the comments that say, nope, you can absolutely Google Workspace and Google Drive are better than OneDrive and SharePoint. And a lot of today's conversation is more opinion and perspective and experience than it is fact, because the end of the day, a business won't be like, they can't do wrong using Google Workspace or Office 365. They may be able to be more efficient on one platform versus the other, but even if they make the arguably wrong choice for their business, they're still going to be able to function just fine.
Gotcha. Yep. Yep. And that's pretty much the general consensus that I found too. It's just, depending on the circumstance, kind of like we mentioned in the beginning of the video. But onto my next point, since you mentioned it or touched on it really briefly, is as far as security goes. I know you mentioned there's a little bit more security protocols with Microsoft 365 versus G Suite. And one of the things I read online was, essentially from a security standpoint, there's more flexibility and there's a lot more options from a security standpoint with Microsoft, just because Google and with G Suite or Google Workspace, there's a lot of third-party extensions that you can install on like Chrome, for example, or on Gmail, and that can lead to potential security risks. So can you walk me through just some of the security standpoint differences between the two and which outperforms the other from a security perspective for businesses?
Sure. I mean, again, this is the whole conversation is little touchy and sensitive, but by and large, Microsoft, due to their client base size, their ecosystem, and their historically speaking, they've been going after businesses for much longer than Google has, anyways. And so they've got a larger gamut of scenarios that they need to be able to support from a security perspective. With Microsoft 365, for example, depending on the license, it can include Defender for Business, which is a very advanced antivirus product for your desktop or laptop or servers and whatnot. They've got an offering that you can add on, which is, I think it's called Microsoft Lighthouse, or forgive me, that may be the wrong term. They've got a bunch of different names, but where you can have Microsoft security engineers, not like the scam callers we're all used to, but this is an actual subscription service managed through your Microsoft 365 dashboard, where they're basically acting as your SIM or SIEM tool for aggregating all the log files and all the information and activity that's going on your systems and your network, and analyzing that, looking for indicators of compromise or threats. Google doesn't have that. Google doesn't have their own antivirus product for desktops. Again, Google Workspace as a whole is focused to live in your web browser. And that's really as far as they want to take it. Google and Microsoft, from just like a password perspective and two-factor authentication type stuff, they're about parity at the basic level. And then if you want more advanced, Microsoft has more advanced offerings and licenses you can add on to enhance that functionality. Whereas with Google Workspace, you have to bring in third-party tools like Okta or Duo, typically, to get kind of parity with what you can pull off with just the Microsoft 365 platform for securing like two-factor logins, or even logging in general to computers with your 365 identity versus your email address and password for your Google Workspace account. Does that explain, or do you want me to keep diving deeper?
No, that explains it pretty well, just from a high level. It sounds like to me, from my perspective, when it comes to, for example, things like integrations and, just as we touched on from a security standpoint, it looks like they can basically, if you try hard enough, you can accomplish the same thing. But with Google, it's going to maybe take more time and cost more money. You need to add some third-party software onto your computers, along with where Microsoft is kind of like a one-stop shop for everything that's automatically integrated.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, there are certainly times where, even on the Microsoft side, it's beneficial for one reason or another to bring in an Okta or a Duo or another third-party tool for certain specific scenarios. But again, by and large, our experience over the years has been for the more operationally mature business, Microsoft 365 is a stronger platform to enable them to grow and be more operationally mature and efficient than Google Workspace is. And again, that's not to say there aren't operationally mature clients out there or businesses out there that would do better on Google Workspace. It's just not our experience.
Gotcha. On to just a scenario that I thought of. So, say for example, there's a smaller company, say 15 employees. They're currently on G Suite, but they're making that transition into Microsoft 365. What does, I mean, a few things. What does training look like for those new employees? How easy is it for them to make that transition from using Google into Microsoft? About how long does it take for them to, adapt? And then what are some ways that, us as a managed service provider can help with that transition to getting employees up to speed, with making a change such as migrating from Google
Sure.
to Microsoft?
I mean, again, it somewhat depends on the scenario and the circumstances, but it isn't much of a lift. Like if you've got an employee that you brought on and you've trained them in an operation in your business, and they went from not knowing anything about that operation to being able to do that operation on their own, they'll be able to make the jump from Google Workspace to Microsoft 365. It's kind of like if the button is in the upper left corner in Google, maybe it's in the upper right corner in Google in Microsoft, excuse me. Things are moved a little bit, but by and large, it's a very similar approach. The big difference that we find is, or what might contribute to a longer transition period or training period for employees, is if those employees have never once used the Office suite, like they've grown up, lived and breathed in Gmail, and that's all they've ever done. It's a little bit longer for them to understand some of the values of like Excel, Word, PowerPoint. But in the types of businesses we typically service, the power of Excel alone, let's take that for example, and what you can do with formulas and reporting and analytics far and away outstrips what you can do in Google Sheets. Google Sheets is like a kindergartner compared to Excel. And so a lot of times, once they start understanding that power, it's a little bit of a hurdle if they're not wanting to make the jump and learn, if they're kind of like holding on to the Google Workspace approach. It's a little bit of we need to push them and help our clients encourage their employees to embrace the new approach rather than fight it. But we typically see like once they get over that hump, and it's maybe a couple hours, maybe a couple days of just grumbled using it and stumbling through, the light bulb goes off. Like everything clicks, and then they're like, "Wow, I can do this, I can do that. I don't have to remember 3 different account passwords because it's all tied to my login." And they start seeing some value back to them that improves their day to day. And that's when they just tend to embrace it, and it's easy. From the actual mechanics of the training, things really aren't different. It's more, where is the button placed? It's like, are you using like Gmail in the web browser and you used to labels on email versus Outlook either in the web browser or on the desktop and a folder structure. Now, Outlook does have labels as well, but they approach the labels and these kind of sorting and organization concepts slightly different. And so it's kind of like reading a different book, learning to ride a bike or anything new. It's unfamiliar until you just get into it a little bit. But we haven't had a single client transition from Google Workspace to Microsoft 365 and want to go back. Even their employees that kicked and screamed moving over to Microsoft 365 are telling us, thank you. This is a better objective experience for us. We're able to do more. We're able to be more efficient. We're not having the same issues we had on Google Workspace.
Gotcha. Okay, that was the question that I thought about, just from an employee and kind of human resources standpoint, making that transition. Because as far as the technology goes, technology is technology. It works. You can get it done. But I
Yep.
think the bigger aspect is the human element that's needed.
And
When
I
you're
think,
going to make that transition.
yeah, and I think the biggest thing is, and what I'd recommend any business considering making this transition, is think of ways that you can spin this, like not just about the improvements to the business operationally or process flow, but think of what improvements this is going to bring to your employees. Think of a couple specific scenarios. And then when you're communicating about the change and saying, hey, we're going to be making this transition, our IT provider, or we're bringing in this MSP to help this transition. This is what it's going to mean to you. Now, there's some benefits to the business, but primarily we're thinking about you. Put it in the terms that the employees are going to understand that impacts their day to day, and be upfront and honest and say, look, there may be some hiccups, there may be some frustrations in the beginning, and it may mean ultimately in the very short term you're less efficient. But once you get up to speed and we're set up on this platform, we're going to be set for success. And here's some reasons why. Get them to buy in at their individual role level, and all that. And it's going to be a much smoother process than just kind of being an edict coming down from on high saying, we're moving to Microsoft because it's going to make us more secure. Because the typical employee, they care about the health of the company, but saying it's more secure means nothing to them.
Sure, sure. And that's something that employers need to think about. But maybe even, another thing is suggesting maybe getting a few employees in your organization that like using Microsoft Office 365, versus G Suite, and essentially being an internal champion for that process
Absolutely.
and that movement as well, to not only preach the benefits, but also to help train other employees that are making that transition that might not be as familiar as them, to make it smoother, make it more helpful. And then obviously too, as well, with a good IT provider, assisting you along the way, I think that transition can be pretty smooth. Looking at it from all those angles from an internal perspective. Just on to my final question now. Say for example, a business is kind of at a crossroads. I mean, say for example, they're growing and they're growing really quickly. They started off as maybe a 1 or 2 person company on G Suite. Now they're at maybe 15 employees, and they're kind of at that crossroads of, using thinking about switching over to Microsoft, and they're also going to be adding more employees. You know, from a scalability perspective, and bringing on more people, bringing on more business. Can you talk to me a little bit about some of the benefits that Microsoft would bring to the table when it comes to building an organization and making it scalable long term?
For sure. I mean, the simple answer is, from our perspective, what Microsoft adds to the stack or the platform beyond email, Word authoring, like spreadsheet editing type stuff. It's like the Microsoft Flow, being able to build automations and Microsoft Forms to build onboarding forms that then can trigger automation. So like you have a new employee onboarding. We can in the Microsoft ecosystem, you can build one form that then kicks off a bunch of tasks to happen automatically behind the scenes, to create the user, to set permissions, to grant them access to different applications, to generate documents for them to sign, to generate things that they need on their first day, whatever. It's kind of unlimited as far as how creative you can get with what you can leverage and automate. But it builds a much more streamlined approach to onboarding your employee, so that your employee, the first day, they're not getting there and everything's kind of scattered and they don't have a computer, they don't have logins to systems they need. Because by day 2 or 3, if they don't have that stuff, they're going to be looking and saying, wow, this employer really doesn't have their stuff together. They talked a great game, but like once you actually see how the sausage is made, it's just complete chaos. And they're not going to want to really typically thrive in that environment. They're going to be like, well, it's a paycheck. Like the mind flips to that model. Google Workspace doesn't have that functionality. You got to go and create that, create their user account, their email, get them access to what shares they need and stuff like that in Google Drive. And then you have to go get their computer set up and create a login for their computer and manually create logins to any cloud apps. And then like it creates confusion. It creates the chance of human error. Like if you're having to create 5 or 6 different accounts and different logins for this one employee, what are the chances that A, you're going to write the passwords down correctly to give them to the employee, and B, that employee is going to remember them? And that's setting aside the security concerns of you knowing or creating passwords for another employee and then writing them down or documenting them somehow and handing them to them, and the employee likely not ever changing them. Typically, we find if you walk in to a place that's running G Suite, you can lift up the keyboard and find a Post-it note with usernames and passwords for different tools and apps that they're using, because very rarely do people set up all their applications to tie back to a single user account within Google Workspace. And so again, you can do it, but it's just like it's an uphill battle in Google Workspace, and you're bolting on a lot of other functionality and other tools to accomplish what you can with what's baked in in the Microsoft 365 platform.
Sure. Awesome. Well, that's all the questions I have for this episode. This concludes episode 8 of the Horizon Managed Services podcast. Thank you guys all for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe and follow for more content. We do these every week. So thanks, guys. See ya.
Thank you.